Evening. Very proud to have Dr. Preeti Agalayam, Associate Professor, Department of Chemical Engineering from IIT Madras. And thank you, Dr. Preeti, for accepting an invitation. And my proud privilege to introduce Dr. Preeti. So she did her BTech in Chemical Engineering from IIT Madras, after which she went to University of Massachusetts to do her PhD. And after which she did her postdoctoral work also at MIT. And after that she decided to return back to motherland. So she joined as assistant professor in IIT Bombay in Department of Chemical Engineering, where she spent 7 years. After which she then thought, okay, let us come back to my alma mater in Chennai. So since 2002, 2009, she has been at IIT Madras, Department of Chemical Engineering. And more than that, the moment our people in the team saw her name, they told, Subhash is right here now, told, hey, Dr. Preeti, she's a marathon runner, man, like how did you get her? Okay, so she's well known in her marathon running and cycling circles. So she's an avid runner, and she also blogs a lot, and mainly about her adventures in running and parenting. So that's quite interesting. So I mean, she's, I think, probably the millennial teacher we can call. So, and handling all these young people in IIT Madras. So we requested her to share her experiences in teaching and learning these, the sort of mentoring this young crowd in IIT, the cream of the society you can call. So over to you, Dr. Preeti, for your lecture. Thank you.
First of all, I'll use the other mic. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm not sure if I'm as impressive as Gopal made it out to be, but I really hope that we make some connections and we can share some thoughts. There's a very grandiose title for my talk today, Technology Trends, etc., but that's really not what I'm going to do. I'm just going to share with you some personal experiences I have had as a teacher and a learner. And I hope that we can pick up common threads from that and have some discussion to be fostered from that. And one thing that I was mentioning before the formal part of the evening started was, as a teacher for 10 years now, I'm not upset by interruptions. So it's not like I lose my flow of thought just because you ask me a question. So please feel free at any point of time to say whatever you want to say, whatever is in your mind that you want to share with the audience. I'll really appreciate if you just stood up or raised your hand maybe and said those words so that the discussion can be more interactive as well. So that would be fine with me. I do have some material that I have over here. As a teacher, I can't resist having notes with me. But I hope it won't be as bad as the classes that you've sat in the past, not as boring. I at least hope that nobody will nod off in this 45 minutes that I'm going to spend with you. If you feel like nodding off, put your hand up and say, Preeti, you're really boring me. Can I say something instead? I can do this better. And that will be fine as well.
We have given coffee for that.
I see, okay. So coffee shots with intravenous. I think that my students drink coffee too, but doesn't seem to work for them. So what I have planned is, first of all, I want to talk about a little bit of background about me, so that you know where I come from. I want to say, first of all, that I have always been very passionate about teaching. Right from my childhood, it was almost like I knew this is where I want to find myself. Moments of lack of confidence, whether I can reach there, were definitely there. There's all these crazy exams all of us have to write, and it's a bit of a gamble. But if anyone asked me, what do you want to do, it was always, the answer was always be a teacher in some form or the other. And it's not a big surprise that that was what was topmost in my mind, because I come from a family of teachers. So this is a familiar profession for me. Dad was a professor in chemistry, mom was teaching at the university linguistics and so on for a few years. Even my grandfather was a historian, and he was a teacher at the school level in old Mysore in those days of British Raj and a little bit after independence and so on. Even many of my aunts are even currently are teachers of various subjects and so on. So this is what I saw growing up. So this is really being a teacher was what I saw around me when I was a child, and that's what I think built the passion in me to be a teacher. Despite that, I have to admit that it required a lot of focus to stay on track of this wish of mine through college and graduate school, because this wasn't a common thing that my peers were choosing. Everybody wanted to be anything but a teacher. So if you, even now, if you poll my students and ask them which of you want, how many of you want to be in academics, very small, out of kindness of their hearts, because they can see the pain in my face, and they say, ma'am, okay, I will be try to be a professor. So nobody really wants to be in this, but so it required me to be really focused and get inspired, talking to dad and others periodically to stay on track of this. And so once I did that, once I got my PhD, I didn't apply for any other jobs. I looked for a teaching position, and then I've just been here growing roots for the past 12 years or so. So if I look at my, if I try to trace my trajectory through this whole teaching gig of mine, I sort of put it into three divisions. First is what I call the baby pool, swimming pool. It was a very comfortable time. This was back when I was a postdoctoral researcher in Cambridge, and I had the opportunity to be a mentor to some of the underprivileged immigrants that were in the city. So it was a city-based initiative at a community center over there, and I used to go there periodically, and mostly I was chatting, mentoring South Asian kids. Suddenly there was a Mexican girl who came there, and she was struggling with chemistry, and one of the facilitators said, look, you're a chemical engineer. Instead of just this faffing, mentoring type of thing, why don't you do something with your subject and help her in chemistry? I spent literally just a few days with her. Of course, it's a long time ago, so maybe my memory is also fading a little bit, but I don't recall spending hours and hours. I bought a good book, very simple, very nicely written chemistry book, different from what was prescribed for her in school, and we sat together a few hours, I think, over the course of a month, and just chatted about it. And I said, this is the concept, you try it out, here's a few things that might work for you. The next time she wrote an exam, she got, I think, 99%. Her marks were 99 on 100. So that was, I felt very happy. I said, hey, from here to the moon, you're going to be this awesome researcher in chemistry. You'll do a PhD in chemistry. You'll become this, you'll become that. That was what I was thinking as I walked to my next session with this Mexican girl. But what she said was, look, ma'am, I have 99 on 100. I know everything there is to know. So I don't need to learn from you. I don't need you to teach me anymore. That's what she came back with. But of course, she's 12, 13 years old. That's, I think that's the way you think. That was a lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed that interaction I had with that girl back in, I think, 2001 or so. The next thing I knew, I was in the deep blue sea. I'm not a good swimmer. I barely just learned swimming recently. I'm in the deep blue sea here, desperately trying to stay afloat. This was a 100 people strong classroom at IIT Bombay. So 100 IIT undergraduates, completely dispassionate about chemical engineering, caring not a little bit for this tiny person who's just jumping around, talking something about kinetics, reactions. Really, they didn't care. So this really, from that interaction with that Maria from Mexico to this was such a big difference for me. That's when I seriously started doubting myself. Is this, I mean, have I made the right choice? All those years of focus and getting here to be the assistant professor at IIT, was this the right thing? Because I'd walk into the classroom and it's dead cold, right? Not because of the air conditioning, but because that's the way the students are staring at you. So the first year was challenging. I think one of the main reasons was that the classroom was so large. And I think as a skill, I work better with smaller interactions and rather than a very large audience that is an amorphous mass that I don't know about. But I learned lots, I think, from that experience. I learned, I read up a lot, learned how to use some special ways to deal with very large audiences, how to nevertheless engage a classroom that has so many people sitting over there. And the next spell, which is in the past 5-7 years as I see it, I think of as a nice comfortable swimming pool for me. I've learned swimming now, actually really also recently. So comfortable swimming pool, I'm doing the stroke that is easy for me. There's no sharks. No sharks that are out to attack me. Everything is nice and neat, and that is the classrooms that I'm in recent times. So I have 50 to 70 students. I know I can engage with them reasonably well, not all the time, not 100% of the time, but definitely most of the time I'm able to see them eye to eye. If some of them are disinterested, I make an effort to see if I can get them back on track and so on. I teach elective classes which fewer people take. We have a hand.
Yeah. So when you shifted from Bombay to Chennai,
yes,
right, there you were in the deep blue sea, here you were comfortable.
Not exactly. No, sorry. The first few years at IIT Bombay was like that, and then I found my feet a little bit. I spent 7 years over there.
Well, my doubt that came to mind is, was the shift only in you, or was it also the shift between the culture of students at IIT Bombay versus IIT Chennai?
No, actually, they are the same. Small differences, but the students that
so basically, everybody is still dispassionate.
Yeah, a fair bit. So I think I learned a few lessons, and the classes are a little bit smaller by 5-10% over here. Yet we are also growing here as well. So it wasn't just moving from Bombay to here. It's just that I found my feet and learned the stroke a little better.
Because
my
I
breathing
assume
improved.
that it would be the same. The kids would be
Yeah, they are.
dispassionate.
Yes, absolutely.
I would expect that.
Especially about chemical engineering, which nobody seems to like. So that I feel was my trajectory from that baby pool, which was awesome, which was a wonderful experience, to this discomfort in the initial years with the large classrooms and so on, to now where I wouldn't say that I'm super confident or that I'm excited 100% of the time, or that I have a good connect with the students 100% of the time, but most of the time, and I'm comfortable and I know what changes to make in myself and the way I teach, and what to bring to the class next time, how to make corrections, so that for the most part things are on even keel. So that I feel is my trajectory. But many times when I'm with younger people, they ask me, what do you do? And I have to almost shamefacedly admit that I'm a chemical engineer who doesn't practice engineering really. So I just joke about it, saying those who can do and those who can't teach. Right, so that's what so I can't, so I teach is what I jokingly tell them. But I think I found my feet, and I'm comfortable in this. Along the way, there's several what I want to think about as life lessons that I have learned, which is what I wanted to talk for the next few minutes about, because that may be something that's interesting to you. So I have a yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I have some thoughts on that a little bit later. I'll be happy to go to that. So some of the challenges that I've been facing as a teacher, I just thought about them, and I listed them. And one is what you say, that lack of interest in chemical engineering in particular, and in anything I have to say in general. This is something that is a big challenge. Having very large classrooms and really horrendous classrooms, I think Vijay will agree with me when I say that in the campus our classrooms are really not comfortable for anyone. So this is another problem, challenge that I have faced, especially when there are lots of students in the room. Another problem I have is that students tend to copy assignments. I don't know what your experience is, but the younger generation seems to feel that it's just okay. I mean, it's just fine that I didn't do any work, I just took my neighbor's thing, I wrote it down. It's like, it's almost like they're entitled to it. Whoever, young or old, is like, hey, I wrote it, didn't I? Isn't it in my handwriting? Doesn't that count? Copy paste. It's the copy paste culture which drives me nuts, because it may be okay in certain situations, but when I'm trying to teach something and I'm trying to see if they can solve the problem themselves, what's the point of copy from the neighbor? So that's another thing that really drives me very crazy, and it's a big challenge, and that's something that, you know, it's a burning issue for me to address. The other thing is that overall there's a constraint on time. All of us are managing too many things. Myself, my students, they're doing, you know, 100 things simultaneously. They're preoccupied with that. I also am doing 100 things, and so one has to really carefully apportion out time for academic work, and this is one of the challenges I think that is on our heads right now. And a couple of other things that I've written down are our administration gives us rigid rules. I'm sure again this is something that you will reciprocate. There are some things that we cannot which we disagree with, but we cannot change because it comes from somewhere above us, and sometimes these are not helpful things. And the last thing I've listed over here is that I have to do a lot of evaluations. I have to correct very horribly written exams, and this is something that really bothers me. Handwriting, I mean, people just don't care about how they write, and there's loops and curricles going all over the place. How do you deal with something like that? How do you get past that and get to the subject matter and really do a decent job of evaluation? So some of the, I haven't been, I don't think, successful in addressing all of these things precisely or completely. So, but some of the things that I've been trying are like this. In many instances, I go into the classroom and say, hey, this is the larger topic. You tell me within this what you've read in newspapers or popular media or whatever, which is of interest to you. And we can bring those topics to the class through some shape and form. Either I give lectures or I assign work wherein you read something and come and make presentations in the class yourself, because this is a topic that's exciting for you. So I'm sure you'll read about it and be willing to come back and make present. So that seems to work a little bit at least, although the way sometimes it backfires because they get irritated that they are asked to do some extra work, and teaching is your job. My job is to just passively sit and copy down whatever you've written on the board. So trying to put the monkey on their backs and say the onus is on you to learn. And all I can be, all I should be is a facilitator who doesn't put roadblocks for your learning. I don't have to be that, you know, teacher with a stick who says, one, repeat after me. I don't have to be that sort of teacher. But convincing them that I don't have to be that sort of teacher, and overall our experience will be better, not just for me, but for them as well. If we work this way, is difficult. So, but I do try that periodically, and at least some of the students in some of the courses respond. I also incessantly collect feedback from them. So almost every few days or so I give them little pieces of paper and say, write whatever you want. You know, you like something, write about it. Don't like something, write about it. It works better when I do this feedback anonymously, because they imagine that I'm an ogre of some sort, that if they say bad things about me, I'll immediately deduct 5 marks from them, is the assumption, which is, I try telling them that I am not an ogre. If you write bad things about me, I'll not deduct 5 marks. And one of the things that I'm trying very hard is to take any criticism, any feedback that comes to me as constructive and try and build upon it. It isn't easy all the time, but that's something that I'm trying. But then again, some of them do play ball this way and some of them don't. So for this copying part of copying assignments thing, one thing I've done over the years is I don't give them any copyable assignments. Right, so I've tried to see if I can shame them into being mature and responsible about it. And I don't like the way I come across when I have to, you know, say you are bad, you are immature, you are wrong. And those are not things that are easy for me to say. Those are not easy things for them to listen to about themselves, because they are not very good at handling criticism. So I have sort of circumvented that problem, which is important to me, by giving them, I very rarely give them things that they can copy from each other. So each, I divide them into groups, for example, and I say each group does a different thing. It means that I have to be a little more creative about how I construct the curriculum and the class, but that's fine. That's the hard work that I am willing to put to avoid the frustration of having copied assignments on my desk for evaluation. 100 of them, and the origin, sources are maximum of 2. Rest are all copied. So that's really not a worthwhile use of my time, in my opinion. So I get a little creative about the assignment. Yes, yeah.
Is this copying an Indian problem or universal problem?
Yeah. I'm not the right person to answer this. I think my experiences are narrow in a sense, because I've been in 3 universities, all of them in one part of the United States aside from the Indian ones. I was recently, 2 days ago, I was at an IIT alumni gathering, and I brought the same point up about how students don't mind copying, is what I said. And one of these senior alumni said, you've been in IIT, didn't your classmates copy? And yes, my classmates did copy when I was a student as well, but I didn't. You know, either way, like some people say that if I show my answers, that's not copying. If they copy my answers, that's copying. I believe that both ways it's wrong. Both ways it's incorrect, and you know, you're not some super intelligent person because you're the source of all the rest of it. So I've never copied through school and college, and definitely not in graduate school, where opportunities were even less for me to do so. But I have seen around me people have copied, whether it's here or over there. And
this is the negative trend that you started seeing only the last 10 years?
No.
When you speak to your senior professors, they are also saying the same thing.
Yes, so this alumnus I was talking about, he's a very senior person. He graduated in 76, and he's saying that his classmates, there was rampant copying at that point of time. And I graduated in 95, and there was
I tell you, a lot of times in the schools to get the 100 out of 100 or
yeah,
high marks,
yeah,
the correspondent of the school
Yeah.
or the principal
Yes,
or the
I've seen that.
teachers in the plus 2 exams,
yeah,
they provide the environment for the students to copy.
yeah. So I've seen this.
So that's what I'm saying. Is it the trend that's happening only recently, or I thought, like, you know, in the past that IITians in a different context of perception?
Yeah. So I don't have the numbers that show that this is a more recent trend, but what you're saying about schools at the administrative level being more involved in this sort of malpractice is definitely on the rise. I used to work with a municipal school in Mumbai, and there was one girl, she was really good. The teacher used to take her, she was in 4th standard, they used to take her and make her write some of the 6th standard students' exams. The teacher used to take her and make her write exams for other people, so they would have good percentage, good pass percentage, and so on. So I have seen some of it, but I don't think I would put my neck on the line and say this is more recent, this is more rampant in recent times. I don't know. I think it's just been there. It's probably more evident now because the numbers are more. There's just a lot more people, you know, getting degrees and so on.
I studied in NIT, National Institute of Technology. After that, I did a post-graduation at National Institute of Design. But these two schools are entirely of a different nature.
Yeah.
One is a technology-based school, one is a design-led school. One is a technology-based school, one is a design-led school. In NIT, we do not have exams at all. You're asked to showcase whatever work you have done throughout the semester in front of the entire school, not just your class, but across undergraduate, postgraduate, anyone who walks in is able to critique you over there. Having said that, I have also seen that the crowd which comes to NITs, I've seen them in my class, they would copy, they would do stuff like that.
Yeah.
At NIT, everyone would vehemently protect their work.
Yeah.
They're passionate enough about that.
Correct.
And I believe this trend is there in most of the art schools.
Creative.
Art schools, yes, they're there.
Yeah.
And people own their work.
Yeah.
The sense of ownership of their work is strongly missing in our technology schools. The other factor is, as I was saying about the board exams, I've seen that board exams, in certain board exams, I've seen in Gujarat it happened, that police is deployed to check malpractices.
Yeah.
Now the moment you do that, you're creating that ambience that you are a criminal to be patrolled, and that has a very bearing impact on children.
Yeah.
So it's not a small thing, it's a very big thing you're entering into. So the point of having an exam where you just reciprocate or just bring out whatever we have mugged up,
Yeah.
then it becomes a problem.
So it is true that the nature of our exams are such that it's possible to copy. So that's one thing that I try to avoid in my course. It's not always possible because I teach fairly mathematical courses and you have to give problems. You have to have people solve problems and so on. But then this mindset that it's okay to take another person's work and call it your own is not just in schools or middle schools or municipal schools or in college, right? We've recently had the issue of plagiarism in journalism. And it's the same thing, it's a different face of the same problem, that it's okay to write a whole novel that a young girl wrote, copying bits and pieces from various books that she has read and call it inspiration. So I think this problem is larger than that, and we really have to, if we believe that this is wrong, those of us that have stakes in it have to be really creative in figuring out ways to overcome it, is what I feel.
Is moving towards MCQs.
Yeah.
That becomes purely inky pinky ponky.
Multiple choice questions, yeah.
It's inky pinky ponky. Even in TOEFL, GRE,
Yeah.
It's inky pinky ponky. So one man print says A, B, C. Fair enough. Everybody can hear this and then make the same choice. So I think somewhere we lack the orientation towards question paper making, question paper creation. Should be more
creating the questions is not a problem. What we balk at is correcting them. So having to read everyone's individual handwriting and
that's okay.
part marks.
I'm talking
and all
about
that.
ABC choice.
Yeah.
Most of the IAS questions are now multiple choice.
Yeah.
So that being the case, there could be a lot of ways of copying.
Yeah.
That arises, because that's the way everywhere people are moving. You take a sheet and then mark 1, 2, 3,
Bubble
4, 8.
everything. Yeah, even in schools this bubbling is now.
TOEFL, GRE have all come to that stage.
Yeah.
So how do you tackle that?
Yeah. I don't know.
How do they perform at work? How do they perform?
My students?
See all the issues in colleges and
Yeah.
schools.
Yeah.
But by the time they finish school, they are in some company.
Yeah.
Companies are growing.
Yeah.
So where is an issue? So are they really performing in the company? I mean, is something that crib about?
So my experience
I mean,
is.
they're always cribbing about the education institutions. Otherwise, they should become unemployable in a company.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a fair number of unemployable people, but
they still.
I'm sure they pick up their lessons further along, or also, I mean,
They learn during the first and second years of work.
I'm sure they get some raps on the knuckles in various parts of their lives, and and then they correct themselves hopefully, or else they crash and burn hopefully, or
Maybe the work is very simple enough to survive.
or their bosses are all, there's a big nexus, everybody is doing that and their bosses are also in the game. And,
Factory model, you're saying.
Reuse is there, right? Reusable.
Ultimately, when they go out, they unlearn. They learn and relearn.
Yeah.
They go to unlearn everything. And how many of us are really related to what we study and what we think about something?
No, it's not the subject matter that's at discussion, right? Yeah, it's how you think of your work and others' work and so on.
So, since this is widespread and rampant, do you think this is because it's a means to an end? See, he said in the NID, they are creative, so therefore they protect their work.
Yeah.
But But when they go through college,
Yeah.
they are not going to do that when they work. Most of them end up in different professions.
Yeah.
So for them, getting 90% is the end goal.
Yeah.
Is that
So,
something that's on your mind?
unfortunately, my experience is limited to the type of students that I've been teaching. And with our students, it's not even that. It's not even the grades and, you know, lack of interest. These are not there in our exams. So our exams are done okay. We have measures also to avoid these. These are done in class assignments which they think of as silly and not a good use of their time, which they can rather spend watching movies. Our students, after having said all that, are fairly serious about, they're there because they're fairly serious about academics. Even if they don't like chemical engineering, even if they're going to get some stupendous salary in an investment bank, they are responsible enough to know that they have to pass and get a good CGPA from us. So they do that, they do their exams just fine. There's not much to complain about in their exam, either in their practices or in their performance. What they tend to do with this is in class assignments, and even that I am not willing to abide by. That is, but then my experience is just limited to these. I'm sure the problem is very different, like he says, in schools or in other places, including in our civil services exam and so on, which I don't have experience with.
So, one point that I feel, and I'm looking at it from the other side of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so student,
Yeah.
right? So the teachers, right? The teachers who have made an impact,
Yeah.
right, are the ones who have been clear up and upfront in saying that, look, at the end of the day, I don't care,
Yeah.
you know, how I'm going to grade you, or you know, the grading mechanism is of least worry for me.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of the day, people who like it, you know, can sit through it, who enjoy it.
Yeah.
You know, those are the ones that I care for in the class, right?
Yeah.
And there have been few teachers who probably all of us will remember, right? Each one of us has few, you know, teachers whom we remember, and those ones at least are the ones who have said that I don't care about an end exam. I'll do it just because system wants me to give an end exam, right? You know, the learning that you have, I'll do it where you guys form groups together, have case studies, you work together as groups,
Sure.
and then see what you can come and bring up and share with the class, right? So there are 3 or 4 teachers whom I can recollect, right, during the MBA. Each one of them, if I have to draw a pattern, were the ones who formed groups, who made us do case studies together,
Yeah.
and you know, did our entire gradation thing throughout the entire quarter.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So and the end exam was, you know, because the system
Just to
wanted
tick
it to
a
be
box,
there. Yeah,
yeah.
tick a box and say, hey, you have 5% for the end exam.
Yeah.
Right. And those are the teachers whom I remember fondly.
Exactly. Yeah.
So which means there has to be something where the students have to feel an emotional buy-in from their side, an engagement from their side into the process.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, because so this is in terms of life lessons that I had written down. One of the things that I thought has been important for me is that I try and remember what it felt like to be on the other side. I've had boring people come up on the board and draw equation after equation after equation and try to make us read those things. That was extremely boring. I have nodded off in several classes which were very of a very descriptive nature, because I didn't care to know in excruciating detail about how the urea production plant is, the nuts and bolts of it are constructed. I didn't care to know about that, because it was said in this, you know, this monotone that was like a nice buzzing bee, and it was in the afternoon at 2 o'clock, and it was right after a nice Tail Sadam lunch, and easy to fall asleep. So I completely agree with you that those of us that try to keep that in mind and are somewhat understanding of why students are doing things that we disapprove of, maybe we'll do a little bit better. But the truth is, not all the teachers that we have are going to be that way. I think that's where the problem. And we have our students go through what 30 teachers through the course of their college life, and not all of them are going to be that way.
Right. And the other experience, right, when you were explaining this, at least as students, right, most of us think that what we are being taught in the classes are things that I can do a Google and get the answer for.
Yeah,
right?
that's the recent. That's I think a recent trend.
Right. And you know, pretty much everything which was purely fact-related content that was being shared, we would just let it go by.
Yeah.
Right?
And this is a very interesting thought, because this is more recent. So when we were in the classroom, we had those really crazy books that, in math especially, we had these Russian authors, very hard to read them. And there was no internet, Google search, Wikipedia that we could recourse to. So at least marginally we had to pay attention in the classroom if we had to pass the exams, even if it's not to learn. Right? Nowadays, of course, the situation is very different. Even in the class, even as I am speaking, they're on their smartphones or whatever and Googling up the information. And that's fine. No, we should accept that that's a different way of learning, and we should try
the interaction or while the lecture is taking place, right?
Or we facilitate that already. We'll
So
say,
that's
look,
actually, I mean, so what is your gut feel? I mean, who is going to build the gap?
Yeah.
In terms of separating the two types of knowledge, one is, I think, the shallow fact-related things which is reusable, which can be read on their own, self-learning, separate from the interactive, in-depth knowledge. Unless otherwise the curriculum split that knowledge into two different categories. So you allow people to interact and self-learn for 1 week and come and look at the deeper interactions on each and every topic that you know.
So I don't think it's possible to separate these two things and do them as disparate wholes.
I mean, 10 years down the line, I mean, are you going to have the same criticism, saying that, you know, the people, you mentioned about liking and disliking to a particular knowledge.
Yeah.
So maybe I think it is a personal nature that you dislike that knowledge, but somebody else like that knowledge.
Yeah.
So always you are going to see a situation where there is an immediate need for personalized learning. I mean, that is a mandatory thing, because not all the 40 people are not going to be on the same page.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it has to change, that somebody has to build the gate, somebody has to provoke the change.
Yeah.
Separate that thing in terms of personalized learning, and then come and walk into a classroom for the in-depth knowledge. So whatever you're talking about learning, I learned the basics of learning technology before even I come and attend the
yeah, so this is, at least at an individual level, several of us are trying this. So I mean, even simple things like handouts, all the factual information, bulletize them, give it to them as handouts. This is your reading. I'm sure in your MBA classes this was done. Here's your recommended reading. You come to class having read that. We will not go over those. I will not explain that fact. We will discuss situations that will require you to have that knowledge. So we are trying that. It's a little more difficult to do in some of the subjects. I think some of the subjects have moved probably just because more some people have tried, some practitioners have tried this further.
So the other doubt that I had, right, the subjects that you take, do you see a greater acceptance when practitioners come and share that, and there's a better listening happening in the class when a practitioner speaks?
So this is I don't know how to, a good expression that will come to me sometime. This doesn't always work. So I think that our students, some of our students appreciate when we get industry people to come and say, look, you know, for some of the topics it works very well, but not for all the topics. I'm not sure how much of it is driven by the personality of the person that is presenting the material to them. Even if you come with 20 years of experience, the expectation is that you will take the onus of presenting it in a very interesting manner that will catch my fancy and that I like you. If I don't like you, I will not really try and absorb whatever either information or the conceptual thing that you're trying to imbibe in me. this is one thing that I wanted to talk about. It's out of sequence now, but this is great. I think it works better this way. I was at the landmark quiz recently. That was on Independence Day, and in these very smart quizzes that are held, there's this type of question that is super clever. That is, I somehow, being a nerd and a geek, I really like that a lot. But I thought it was interesting, and I thought about how that is sort of what I like to do in my classes. I want to talk about that. So one of the questions was, they flashed a photo of Ayatollah Khomeini, and then they had 2 bits of, I think, video that was supposed to come up with, people watching it were supposed to come up with their names, Joseph Conrad and Anton Chekhov. I think both of them were movies made out of things that these 2 guys had written that were played on the screen. So what's the connection, was the question. Anyone? So there's Ayatollah Khomeini, Joseph Conrad and Anton Chekhov. What's the connection? So good guesses, but the answer is Salman Rushdie. So when when the fatwa on him was made, he took the name Anton Joseph or Joseph Anton, I don't remember exactly. And it was because it wasn't just arbitrarily Anton and Joseph, these are the authors that he really is inspired by. So when he needed to go underground and incognito after the Ayatollah's fatwa, he took up these names. Of course, all these super intelligent people on the stage knew that. They knew this connection like that. We are all sitting in the audience thinking, how do you make this really far-fetched connection between these facts? But they all just knew it. And once, of course, the answer was told, we all also appreciated, would be in the audience, were like, oh, this is such an awesome connection. I would never have thought of it myself. So I think this type of connection questions were, there were many fact-based questions that were asked in the quiz, right? But the ones that really held our interest was when these connections were drawn between very disparate sounding or apparently disparate things. And so I was thinking that, yeah, I feel super excited. My students get, jumpy excited, not when I just present facts to them, but when I take some 2 disparate things and connect them together. So one of the things I always do in my class is this. This is, Lewis Carroll had this word game that he, I think, invented, and that was to take the pig to the sty. You change 1 letter at a time and change the word pig to the word sty. Anyone seen this before? Yeah? Yeah, so you do pin, and then you see, and you say, I think, sin, and you say sip, sap, say, sty. Right? So, and at every step you can only change 1 letter, not more, not less. So this is a very awesome game that I used to play as a child as well when I was reading Lewis Carroll. So when I write reactions, methane, those of you, I know all the people are going to get super scared. So when I have a reaction which is basically one chemical species converting to another, I try to tell my students that the processes have to happen 1 step at a time. You can't jump several steps. You can't go from pig directly to sty by changing all the letters. That's not the game. Even in reactions, that's not the game. Breaking all of these bonds that we have all at once is not the game. It has to be done 1 at a time. When they get that funda, so you get from methane to something called methyl, to something called methylene, and something called methylidine, and finally to carbon. And in each of these steps, 1 bond is broken at a time. So I often present this in my class when I'm talking about reaction mechanisms, seemingly completely unconnected things. But this helps them keep it in mind. It helps them understand, first of all, the concept, and also recall without having to memorize that the rule for making a reaction mechanism is that 1 bond has to be broken at each step. You had a question? Huh? I have 5 minutes. So I really love doing these connection things, and recently at the landmark quiz, that is one thing that I saw that was, I thought, very good. So I have 5 minutes. I'm going to the closing part of my talk. I've completely skipped my life lessons thing, but hopefully you've seen some of the things that I have tried in the discussions that has come up, at least, and some of the strategies that I've tried to use. I've been a teacher now formally for about 11 years. I still remember my dad in his 35th year of teaching. The night before the class, he'd have his books open and he'd be studying for it. And my mom, she wasn't a teacher for as long, but every time she had to teach the next day, she'd have these really large number of notes. She'd finish all the housework because, of course, I was too tied up in my own thing to help her in any way. In the night up to 2 a.m. I'd see her taking notes as well. So those, they have always been my inspiration, and that's how I operate even now as well. I'm constantly learning, and that's what I really enjoy about the profession I'm in. And so the three things that I like to do, actually not just in teaching but also in the way I lead my life, is to really have a lot of energy. Thankfully, I think I'm lucky enough that I inherently have a lot of energy, maybe by eating a lot. I do, despite appearances, do eat a lot, but I have a lot of energy, and I try to bring that in any interaction I have with people that I meet, either in the classroom. Hopefully you've seen evidence of that today as well. So I always have a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and I believe that this is very important for me to go on keeping up with. Second is empathy. So we've been talking about how you have to look from the student's perspective. And I try that. I try to be empathetic up to a certain extent about what's motivating them, what's demotivating them, what constraints do they have. They had a late night of project submission. I shouldn't bombard them with really painful things at 8 in the morning in the class. I should take some feedback from them. I should give them a patient ear if they come to me with any genuine issues. So I try to incorporate that empathy in my interactions with my students and anyone else, my friends and family and so on as well. And the last thing is strive for excellence. There's absolutely no need that any of us in whatever sphere of life that we have chosen should perform below potential. Each of us should be really working hard and striving for that excellence, and that's the expectation I have for my students, for my daughter, for myself, and anyone that I interact with. So I think these three really drive me: energy, empathy, and a strive for excellence. And so far it's been very good for me to focus on these three things. I wouldn't say that I'm an excellent teacher by any stretch of the imagination. My students wouldn't say that either. But I have moments when I feel really very awesome and very excited about what I do, and that is conveyed to my students. And for now, that is good enough. Over the years, hopefully, it will get better and better. So the last things I wanted to do as closing remarks in a way was to talk about two people amongst many others that constantly inspire me. Two famous people. One is a person called Haruki Murakami. Anyone know who he is? He's a writer and a runner. So he's a fairly famous Japanese writer and a runner. We're hoping for the best in terms of the Nobel Prize and so on for him in the future. But he's a runner as well. So which is why I really like him, being a runner myself. And one of the many things that he has said is this quotation, which says that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So pain is inevitable, we can't any of us avoid it, but the suffering that you take from it is optional. So I use that often, that things are difficult, I don't disagree, but that doesn't mean I have to suffer for it or carp about it, complain about it constantly. The other person that I'm constantly, very often inspired by and whom I love is Richard Feynman. So everyone knows who he is, but I call him physicist prankster, because if you've read his books, he was also very much, aside from awesome physics and the Nobel Prize and so on, he used to play a lot of pranks. Very sharp brain. I mean, a very intelligent guy, so he could get away with his pranks as well. And of course, his most famous quotation I try to incorporate in my life, which is that, what do you care what other people think? So that is the title of one of his autobiographical books as well. It's not to say that I'm disdainful of people's opinion, or I don't care about them in that way. But it's to say that the driving force is within me. The motivation for doing anything I want, the strive for excellence or being empathetic, is not forced upon me. It comes from within myself. So these are two quotations that I think about at least constantly, if not incorporate in my everyday living. So with this, I want to close. We've had a very nice interactive session, I think. I'm glad to say that about 2.5 pages of my notes weren't required at all for this 1 hour of talk. I'm sure you're glad about that as well. So thank you very much for your patient ear and your very nice feedback and interactions, and hope we're walking away with something learnt from each other.
Okay, we'll really, because we're running out of time. Yeah.
Thanks very much, ma'am. It's very kind of moving to see the passion about teaching. I think many of us are inspired. It's very nice.
Thank you.
I also think it's exercise a great deal of humility, your openness to learning about life lessons, and it's a very sincere and beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
Having said that, just a few thoughts about the environment in scientific institutions in our country, especially. And this comes from, because we're on a knowledge platform. And the connection between knowledge and socialization as a citizen. And the connection between science and social attitudes. So we have certain parameters broadly, not any specific, but we have some parameters in this country, broken down, let's say, caste, or creed, or gender, or even race, or color of skin, and many of these go on. And I just wondered, how often have you faced half knowledge in these? Because across the world today, we often see a lot of stereotypes, we often see a lot of prejudices, and very knowledgeable and intelligent people are very busy combating them, but they're all drops in the ocean. So as a teacher of a very leading scientific institution, how often do you see the relationship between science and social attitudes, and do you as a teacher see it as necessary to intervene in these, and have you been successful? Thank you.
So I'm I'm a Mary Kom sized basketball player, and the wrong gender as well. So yes, of course, people give you that attitude that how is she going to play basketball? She's 50 kilos in size. But I think some of it is how confident you are within yourself. I'm often in a meeting where I'm the single representative of my gender, also of my height class, but it doesn't. I mean, I've been, I think, fortunate that it hasn't really affected anything, and least of all my attitude towards how I go about things. I've done whatever I would have done if I was 6 foot tall Caucasian blue-eyed male, for sure, I think. So, it's not been a problem. But then my experience has been very, I think, constrained and limited. So it's not been a problem. I agree with you that it could be a problem, and it should be addressed. I think it's a very important one. I'm a strong spokesperson for women's rights and so on.
It's just a little bit of analysis of writings done by the scientific mold of thinking.
Correct.
The scientific personality and temperament shows that there's a lot of social knowledge which is half-baked. And that's my humble submission.
Yes.
And that is a humble concern as well.
I haven't encountered it, hope I don't, but I will definitely think about it in that context.
Science and social knowledge.
Yes.
About society.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. Excellent. Thanks for provoking that, igniting that itself. Thank you.
Wow. My favorite shape of gift books. So thanks so much. It's been wonderful. I'm afraid I have to leave now because I have some visitors. So good luck with the rest of the session.